Hello everyone, greetings and welcome to today's session. We're going to get started. My name is Justin Bush and I'm the coordinator of the Washington Invasive Species Council. The Invasive Species Council was created by the state legislature in 2006 and it is tasked with providing policy level direction, planning, and coordination for combating harmful invasive species throughout the state and preventing others that may be harmful. This is the second webinar in a series of webinars and in-person trainings led by the agencies and the universities that are the front line in protecting the state's natural resources and economy from invasive species. We call this first detector network in Washington, Washington Pest Watch. You don't have to actively search for invasive species or be an entomologist or biologist to participate in Washington Pest Watch. Just keep an eye out in your yard, your neighborhood, or wherever you're out enjoying outdoor activities. Be aware and report what you spot. It's really that simple and easy. We know how to detect and stop invasive species, but we need everyone's help. So be mindful of new invaders such as those that you'll be hearing about today. Our speaker's name is Todd Murray. Todd is the Agriculture and Natural Resource Program Unit Director for Washington State University Extension. Todd received a Bachelor's of Science in Biology from the University of Illinois, Chicago, and received his Master's of Science in Entomology from Washington State University. After graduating, Todd has worked in a number of different positions with Washington State University Extension. Todd has worked in Whatcom, King, Clark, Skamania, and Klickitat counties. Todd has over 20 years of experience working with farmers and gardeners on exotic and invasive insect pests. As the Agriculture and Natural Resource Program Unit Director, Todd supervises over 50 faculty and professional administrators that offer education and applied research leadership throughout the state. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Todd.
Hey, great. Thank you, Justin. Thank you for having me. This is a really cool project that the Invasive Species Council has engaged other agencies and institutes in. And specifically, this one's called Washington Pest Watch, which is funded by USDA APHIS to help us really organize a way to message out to everybody how to normalize, how to submit and look out for invasive species that are affecting Washington State. So it's a really culmination of a number of agency efforts, all led by the Washington State Invasive Species Council. With that, oh, there it goes. With that, I'll just walk you through some of the products of this specific project. We're developing educational tools that maybe folks like you will take out into communities and help educate others about key invasive species that the council's concerned about. We're also developing a first detector handbook, which will kind of walk you through the citizen science of engaging into Washington Pest Watch and how you can help. And then we're offering a number of these educational outreach events via workshops and webinars. A good number of the products that you'll see come out of this project are developed by Justin Bush and Kenzie Smith. Kenzie developed a series of great educational posters that you can contact and get copies of to help really incorporate the idea that to be a first detector is really just becoming educated about what key issues there are for Washington State and look for those in all aspects of your daily life when you're out in the outdoors. As we've found that most of the clientele that we interact with, everybody's outside working already and obviously very interested in the things that they see and the organisms that they encounter outside, that when they see something unusual that they can submit it for identification. So we're really encouraging everybody to become a first detector in all aspects of their daily life. We're going to go through, and I'll go over this in a couple minutes, but we're going to go through different types of pests some of which that we have in the state, some of which that we haven't. And as you run across these organisms out there, feel free to go ahead and report a sighting. I encourage you to download the Washington Invasive Species app. This will help you report. It'll take your coordinates. You can zap a picture with it. That'll get uploaded, and Justin will funnel that out to any given expert to help you identify what potential invasive species you're encountering. So when we talk about some of the pests today, a lot of these are already in the state. Some of them we do want to know what their current distribution is. So I'll encourage you to do a report. I'll also offer other ways to report an invasive species, like going through your Master Gardener office or WC Extension office and reporting it that way, or submitting a physical sample directly to maybe one of the agencies that we previously listed. But I'll clarify that for each pest that we go into. You know, right now, as far as insects go, this is the priority species list. What constitutes a priority species for the council are a number of issues, and it's really the impact that the council can have by adopting one of these priority species and really give credence and some substance behind an outreach effort to educate the general population about some of these key pests. So it's a pretty substantial list. In developing this talk, you know, there's a natural division. So today I'm just going to cover the species that already occur in the state that you might run across. And then we'll develop a part 2 for this talk and cover those species that we really want you to yell and scream once, you know, if you encounter these other species. So today I'm focusing in on the species that are here within the state, and we'll do a part 2 to this to explain further on some of these other species that we don't have. I first want to quickly acknowledge, you know, I probably have, of course, too many slides to get through to make sure that we get to an end and get to your questions and comments. So I want to take an opportunity to really thank a group of core people that work heavy in this area and acknowledge them as I've pillaged a number of their information and slides to help develop this presentation. Well, with this is a really interesting time to be alive on this planet. We have this era of the Earth's history that we're classifying as the Anthropocene, and essentially what classifies this era of life on Earth is our impact to have a substantial global impact and affect things like climate, things that are going to show up in the fossil record, you know, millions of years from now, and so forth. So really 3 key ingredients that I see that we're really addressing today is these 3 things that are happening right now, but changes in our climate. In the Pacific Northwest, we get more rain annually. When that rain comes, it all comes during the rainy season, and then we can have a few months of drought in between. And this is causing some disruption in our plant health and a lot of our perennials like forests and some of our perennial crops. We're seeing drought stress accumulate over a number of years and starting to show the effects. So essentially, we have a lot of susceptible hosts. If there is a new exotic pest that shows up, well, we got a smorgasbord waiting for those new pests. We're also seeing an increased number of species being introduced. As we globalize, more things move around the world, and as more things move around the world, we get more hitchhikers. With that, we're just seeing a larger movement of species across the whole globe. And here locally in the United States, we're also seeing a relative decrease of regulatory support in times of constrained budgets and lower government spending and lower public investment. this is one of those things that we may see an impact on, where more species might get let into the country that could have been stopped at the border due to lower support for those regulatory agencies. So overall, you know, there's an author that took all these factors into account and really assessed what our risks are, and they came up with an estimate of about a 32% risk of a new insect borer that is more damaging and costly than the emerald ash borer. It's going to invade the United States in the next 10 years, and this is back in 2010. That risk has been updated by the authors to where they classify us at you know, we're over at a 70% risk of having something new and nasty introduced. So new bugs in the Pacific Northwest. The Oregon Department of Agriculture has documented 66 new species of insects since 2007. Our Washington State Department of Agriculture has documented 70 new introductions, and these were pest introductions specifically since 1991. So the Pacific Northwest gets its fair share of new insects being introduced. Who's finding all these bugs? I encourage you to look up this publication, and if you don't have access to it, I'd be happy to send it to you. Just contact me, and I'll email it to you. But we went through and picked through all those submissions since 1991 and developed a background story of, well, who was this person that actually brought this new detection to attention and get it recorded? And what you see that only about 28% of the new finds were actually targeted surveys. You know, so where a regulatory agency like WSDA develops a trapping system and actually goes and traps out in the environment and collects that target insect. But all the rest are from just informed people, and a lot of those informed people are come in via the general public, whether they're accessing it directly through WSU or directly through WSDA to get that documented. But it's a sizable amount of new species. So essentially, it's folks like you are the ones that are finding these new bugs. All right, let's just jump into this. I'm going to go through the shopping list for the rest of the talk, and go through some of the key species that we have on our priority list, give you some background about these species, hopefully give you some resources on how to identify these and what to do if you find them, or offer some management practices. But the first one that we're going to discuss is the spotted wing Drosophila. This is one that has been in the news quite a bit as it's made a significant impact. And you're going to see this as a trend with a number of the newer pests that get introduced into North America, especially in the Pacific Northwest, is that a lot of these originate from the Pacific Rim and along the coastal environments of Southeast Asia. So the spotted wing Drosophila historical range and native range is native to coastal Asia and Japan. We call it the spotted wing Drosophila because the males have spots on their wings, and the female does not have the spot on her wings, but you can easily recognize her by this very large prominent ovipositor. And that's that thing circled there down on her business end, and that's how she lays eggs. I'll have a close-up of that here shortly. But essentially, spotted wing Drosophila's distribution in North America happened very quick. It was first discovered in California fruit in 2008. The discovery was late in the year. A diligent field person was adamant that this is an unusual infestation of what's normally a fruit fly, and this was a particularly aggressive infestation when normally fruit flies, those are just flies that take advantage of rotting fruit. So they were persistent in working with their county agricultural specialist to get this identified, and sure enough, it came back as a brand new North American record called spotted wing Drosophila. Right after that, it was found in Oregon and Washington, Florida and British Columbia. And then subsequent years, it has spread pretty quick, all the way to 2014. So it took only about a half dozen years to really spread all the way across the whole mainland. Here's 2 states that still don't report it, but they're likely there, or those states don't have a lot of green things there for them to eat. But the point is, this one was introduced, spread pretty quickly. The pest status of this insect in the Pacific Northwest, it's pretty significant. When it first came in, we scrambled around to really understand the impact of this pest. And a lot of this you can't predict, but when they were doing the nuts and bolts of the economy potential losses of this insect, they're quite staggering. At an estimate of 20% fruit loss for key industries like blueberry, strawberry, raspberry, cherry, they estimated almost $120 million in losses in both Oregon and Washington. And that's a lot, and I can tell you some growers have experienced more loss to this insect, more than the 20%, and others have really tooled up to have to avoid that kind of loss, and it's requiring a lot of inputs. So the host range, it's a fruit fly. It likes overripe fruit, or it can infest overripe fruit. It can also infest underripe fruit, and in the Northwest, where it causes economic damage is in blueberries, raspberries, cherries, and other soft-skinned small fruits. I've seen good populations also build up in soft-skinned peach varieties and backyard orchards, and I know some of the commercial folks have had issue with dealing with spotted-winged Drosophila in peach, and many of you probably already have experience with spotted-winged Drosophila, so this isn't necessarily new news for you. But when you go to pick that fruit, and as you apply a little pressure to that fruit as you pick it, you might actually see a little bubble of juice pop out from underneath the skin, and that's a good sign that it's infested, and that basically what you're looking at is an ovipositional wound. So they can affect fruit pretty quickly as they come into ripening. And the reason why they can do this is because if you look on the right hand of your screen, the spotted-winged Drosophila has a highly adapted ovipositor. Again, this is the female business end of the adult fly. It's adapted for cutting. You can see that striking saw-like blade edge to her ovipositor, and what this allows her to do is to get purchase underneath kind of a tougher fruit skin and kind of cut into it so she can drop an egg in there. On the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see what's more normal ovipositor for most of our other Drosophila species or fruit fly species. But that ovipositor is really designed for kind of laying an egg on a mushy soup like an overripe banana or tomato, and that larvae then kind of develops on that really mushy soft fruit. And this will become more apparent on really why this makes it a really unusual, interesting pest as this talk goes on. The kind of damage caused by egg-laying and larvae, once that skin is pierced, that opens up the avenue for other things like botrytis and other rots to get in there. When the larvae actually get into the flesh of the fruit and start feeding, they'll exacerbate that rot and cause the fruit to decompose much quicker. So essentially, when you have a infested fruit, the shelf life of that fruit is diminished significantly, especially as that fruit gets colonized by more flies and those flies develop. So essentially, these cause just rotten fruit. Fruit susceptibility. There's been some great studies showing how these flies really cue in onto a sweet spot of that developing fruit. So as you can see from this great great visual developed by Dr. Bev Gerdeman up at WSU Mount Vernon. The flies really hone in on that greening stage of the fruit, where the fruit just starts to change color from the underripe green to start resemble more of a ripening fruit. But you know that you've bitten into that strawberry that's shown at the 80% level, that's still a very tart underripe fruit. There's still a lot of green left on that. So they're really getting at just at pre-ripening that's most attractive to the fly. The other thing that makes this so pestiferous is their quick generational turnover. There's a quick just kind of representation of the life cycle of this fly. They're very fecund. A female can lay over 350 eggs. In a lifetime, those eggs hatch pretty quickly, and the maggots can feed in a very relatively short amount of time, within another week. As they transition from larvae to adult fly in the pupal stage, that stage, depending on temperature, can go as quick as 4 days to as long as 2 weeks. And then you pop out with all new flies that can live another 20 to 30 days, depending on what time of year it is. And those flies are out there just laying another batch of eggs. So you can imagine how quick these things can develop in population sizes. When I've seen populations develop in blueberry fields, they're very patchy, and where they occur in very high, dense populations. So they get these kind of populous epicenters and expand out from there as they go into new fruit. The other really interesting thing about this fly is it has an overwintering type, and based on environmental cues, adult flies that are flying around later in the season will promote the next generation to produce what's called a winter morph. And these winter morph flies are much hardier. They can last prolonged longer periods of time. They're darker in color, and they're actually larger in size. So they're just a more robust, hardier fly that the fly produces to get through our winters. And so this fly is able to make it through some pretty cold winters by finding microhabitats and maximize this overwintering phenotype. So all that together has really made this a pest to contend with. For recommendations, it was interesting. I was on a large USDA SCRI grant to where I was tasked to do extension work from this grant, and it was difficult to really find good recommendations for this fly as it showed up. And you're going to see that challenge with a lot of these other newly introduced pests. It takes us a while to come up with good recommendations. So what I did was contacted all the researchers on that grant to gauge them before they published their research. What does it look like as good recommendations? And those recommendations pretty much held true as that research was revealed. I'm not going to go through each one of these, and I'll focus more on the gardener side, but I encourage you to visit Hort Sense for the most current recommendations. You can develop your own traps in the backyard to help you identify when the adults are active and very populous. Highly encourage you to manage alternative hosts around your yards, like make sure you whack the blackberry bushes back. That's a great reservoir for your spotted wing Drosophila. Pick your fruit as often as possible. Make it a point to go out in your gardens pretty regularly, pick the fruit before it gets too infested. Once you pick that fruit, either eat it or cool it as fast as possible to slow down the development of those larvae and slow down the rotting of the fruit. And that'll be perfectly good edible fruit if they've just been egg laid into, there's no rot in there yet, and chilling it down will increase the shelf life of that. And just overall good sanitation practices of just cleaning up your garden with the over-ripening fruit. With all these pests, I encourage you to go to pubs.wsu.edu and download our most current fact sheets. So the interesting thing about this pest, or one of the many interesting things about this pest, is how fast it spread across the country, and how fast it got into all the nooks and crannies of places where it wants to live. And so I got this call when I was down in Skamania County. There's this old dude that says they've been just picking there forever and never had to deal with wormy berries in his huckleberries, but this year every berry was wormy. Granted, this is an exaggeration, but I did get a number of those phone calls come in during August 2013, which is great because then I quickly ran up and went into Indian Heaven Wilderness area. And if you've never been to this place, I highly encourage you to go there. It's beautiful. It's located in southwest Washington State, most of it in Skamania County. And it is huckleberry heaven down there. There's over 7 different species of vaccinium that grow there, and a number of also rubus species that grow in there. So I went up there and grabbed berries. Went to a few sites over the next 3 years and did regular berry collections, and also trapped for adult spotted wing Drosophila. And we found them everywhere. What was most striking is we found them up in some very high elevations, so over 1,500 feet in elevation. So those were places that took a good couple hours for me to bushwhack into, and we're way into the wilderness area of Indian Heaven. And so that tells me that spotted wing Drosophila is very, very good at infiltrating these environments where there's good hosts to be found. It's very good at it. We also found that they're there in pretty sizable proportions. So in one location, Peterson Prairie Campground, which is located just outside of Indian Heaven, we were finding almost half of the berries that I picked were infested with spotted wing Drosophila. We saw some preference between different species, and that's not surprising, as there's a lot of textural, color, chemical differences between these different species, and also timing. So while they might prefer, this is just a snapshot in time, while they might prefer one species over another, as that other species becomes dominant, they probably switch their preference to that. All right, so the point is we got flies all the way around and way up there. So what's the big deal? Is well, there's over 10 different species of vaccinium and rubus up there, and it turns out that if you look into the literature, this is actually what spotted wing Drosophila is designed to do. It's a fly that likes to move up in elevation as the season progresses, as that fruit just begins to ripen as you go up through elevation, and monopolizes that and takes advantage of that underripe fruit before its competitor, other fruit flies, do this. So if you look into the literature, this does this in India, it does this in Japan. And so it's not surprising that this fly found a really good niche here to target vaccinium species in our natural areas. So it's hard not to reflect, and the reason why I want to share this story with you, because it really puts in context of kind of what life is like in the Anthropocene. And when spotted wing Drosophila showed up, it automatically took me back to 10 years earlier, where people were protesting a World Trade Organization in the Battle of Seattle in 1999, and really a lot of the focus was, well, what's this going to do to agriculture? What's this going to do as far as supporting farming businesses and leaning more towards very large corporate conglomerates? What was kind of on the back burner is really, what's the ecological significance of this? Is when you get that much more world trade happening, you also get a lot more hitchhikers out there. And so it only took us 10 years to get one of the worst small fruit pests that we've seen in a long time show up in the Pacific Northwest and really impact our small fruit industries. So it only took just put you in context on how quick these things pop up. And then just from that 2009 detection, it only took like another 4 years to get this cranky guy complaining about his wormy berries, and really just in one fell swoop, an introduction of this new pest has literally changed our ecological landscape, and that's a landscape that us as humans have participated in for a long time. So Native Americans have been utilizing those huckleberries there in Indian heaven for the past 10,000 years, and so it's likely that resource now is forever changed, and this spotted winged Drosophila is now part of the environment up there, and probably going to change on how that fruit is utilized. You know, again, that story is a good one just to put it in perspective. This is one that's widely distributed across the state. We know about it, but I would be interested in hearing from you if you find it in your huckleberry foraging activities these next summers. If you do get flies show up in your berries, I'd sure like to hear about it. Alrighty, so I'm going to try and whiz through these and make sure that I cover all the insects. And, you know, as you get questions, you know, jot them down and we'll address them at the end. But the next one I want to discuss is a red lily leaf beetle. It's a very pretty beetle. It's also called the scarlet lily leaf beetle, or just referred to as the lily leaf beetle. Comes under a number of names, but it is a very striking, I think, kind of beautiful leaf beetle. It was introduced from Europe. It's interesting to watch where the origins of our exotic pests come from. Historically, most of our exotic pests, like gypsy moth, everything like that, have originated from the old world, you know, the European old world aspect, from the initial colonization of Europeans going back way back into history, and all the stuff that we brought with us as Europeans colonized North America. Most currently, as I said before, you're seeing a shift of other insects coming from more of the Pacific Rim as world trade really starts to ramp up. But lily leaf beetle was first discovered in 1945 on the East Coast. This is an interesting observation because you're going to see this with a number of leaf beetles, where when they first show up to a continent, they're detected in the background, but it takes a good number of years, and in this case it took almost 40 years for it really to adapt to local environments and become populous enough to where it became recognized and noticed. So the first records in the US were in 1992 in Cambridge. After that, it's been on rapid spread soon after, and we just had it pop up here in the Northwest very recently. It was discovered in 2012 in Bellevue. Has since then moved out from that kind of epicenter site, likely through natural dispersal and also movement through plant material, and maybe people moving and relocating with their lilies, because what I know about lily lovers is they sure love their lilies and like to dig them up and move them with them. So it's you know, the epicenter is around Bellevue, and it's progressively been moving out from there. I believe that we've had samples as far out past Issaquah and so forth is up to date. Again, these are brilliant red beetles. You won't confuse these with anything else in your yard, especially if you find them on a lily. They emerge pretty much right when the lilies start waking up, and they emerge in spring and start to feed. We have this great website now that we're trying to track the phenology, and when it was launched, we could see immediately that adult beetles were out in March. They start feeding in spring. They lay eggs, and adults will make a distinctive squeaking sound when pestered. And Chris Looney gave me a really cool movie of this, and I couldn't get it to play, but maybe one of these days I'll try and get that online so you can hear that distinctive squeaking. Adults can lay up to 450 eggs per female. They usually lay them in small batches of of, you know, a dozen or so on the underside of leaves, and they're very striking. You won't confuse this with other insect eggs. Take about a week to hatch. Once they hatch, these really gnarly, disgusting looking boogers essentially start devastating your beetles, or excuse me, your lilies. And what you see here is a phenomenon that some insects do. This is similar to a fecal shield, to where the beetles actually cast their old skins on their back, and they'll actually defecate on their back to help create a protective covering that keeps predators and anything else that wants to bother them at a good arm's length, because who wants to eat that? Larvae are ready to pupate into the soil about 3 to 4 weeks after being fully developed. And then as they're in there in the soil, they're usually down in the first inch. They don't penetrate much deeper. They emerge about 3 to 4 weeks later, and the adults then start to foliage feed in the fall. So if you think about it, if they didn't, you know, defoliate your lilies in the spring, they have a second shot at defoliating your lilies in the fall. And as a perennial plant like a lily, you can imagine that plant can only tolerate so many consecutive years of defoliation before it's killed outright. They primarily attack Fritillaria and Lilium species. There's Maggie Freeman is a graduate student at Washington State University and works with WSDA in Chris Looney's lab. She's researching some of those other possible hosts here in the Northwest, and has identified some potentially new hosts that these beetles may impact in our native understory. So that's a bummer. As this new insect colonizes new territory, it's experiencing brand new species of plants that it has not experienced in its evolutionary history, and making adaptations to those, and likely be able to exploit some new resources here in the Northwest. So a lot of these insects, you know, we often focus on the impact that they have on our agriculture and natural resources, but there's a significant ecological impact that all these species make on our native landscape. All right, so I highly encourage you to refer to this website. It's a long, convoluted address, so email me and or contact Maggie directly to get access to this website, because what she's doing is recruiting citizen scientists to help her track the phenology of this insect pest. So please, you know, contact one of us to get access to this website and help contribute to understanding the phenology of this new pest. Maggie's also working on a project with Dr. Looney to explore some, excuse me, some potential biological controls that we could establish here in the Pacific Northwest to help manage this new beetle as it establishes. And you can contact me or contact Maggie directly if you have any questions, and encourage you, if you're in that Bellevue area or around that epicenter and have seen this beetle, please report it and start uploading your observations on that phenology database that she's developed. Alrighty, let's move into the next pest. This is a good one to talk about because this one's very timely in the sense that it's the damage that it's creating this year is quite significant. This is called the European Chafer. Again, this is one of those old school pests that have entered the United States many years ago and have established and have just been developing populations on the east side of the country. And of course, since we do a lot of trade between states and through natural dispersal and natural movement of people, we get a lot of those establishments on the East Coast start moving west, and this is another one of those examples. But it's native to Western and Central Europe. There it doesn't cause much of a problem. It has a whole slew of natural enemies that help keep it in check. I think I have a slide that takes you through kind of the history here, but I just want to give you a quick description of the adult beetles, because if you're in an infested area, you'll start seeing these very soon. They are active from mid-June through July. You know, they're kind of boring in color. You know, they aren't as striking as the lily leaf beetle. They're very kind of either a light brown or brick red in color, about a ½ inch. Females are pretty fecund. They can lay up to 50 eggs throughout their lifetime. They're just starting to become active. And let me see if this will play. If you look here, the adults do a really unusual thing. As they kind of emerge as adults, they undergo these mass flights right at sunset. And this video was taken when the entomologist in Vancouver, British Columbia, invited us up to come look at it. And he told us to be there around about 9:38 in the evening, and we thought that was kind of a weird request for us to be there at that exact time. And sure enough, as 9:38 approaches, these beetles bubbled up out of the turf in the area, in the neighborhood of New Westminster, and would make these mating swarms. And essentially what the beetles are doing is cueing in on the red wavelengths of the setting sun against that dusk sky, and what they're looking for is a dark silhouette against that dusk sky. And when they find a good dark silhouette, it's usually a tree branch or so forth. The female will land on there, and she'll get swarmed by, you know, a dozen to 100 males right there. And you can imagine the disruption that this causes in this New Westminster neighborhood of Greater Vancouver, because that, you know, dark silhouette could have been a house, tree, or somebody walking their child in a park. So it caused quite a bit of chaos for about 15 minutes. Then as those mating swarms kind of settled in, the chaos kind of died down until the next night. Once those eggs hatch, they develop into these C-shaped grubs that have well-developed eggs and start feeding on the fine hairs of the grass roots in the first 2 inches of the soil. They'll do this for a whole year and pupate and emerge again as adults the whole next year. But I'll take you through that life cycle here shortly. The key is that if you're digging through sod and see a grub that's, you know, 1/4 inch to 3/4 inch long, that has well-developed legs and is C-shaped, that's likely European chafer. It's one you definitely want to collect samples and report. We're also concerned about Japanese beetle, which also look like this but a little bit smaller, and we really want you to report that one also. Here's that life cycle. Adults swarm and are visible, you know, starting soon. They fly for a couple weeks, mate, lay eggs. Those eggs hatch and start beginning to feed. As they feed, they start developing and overwinter in these earthen cells if they're in an area where they get a good frost. In western Washington, where they now occur, they're likely feeding all year long and don't bother to overwinter because they have mild temperatures over in western Washington. Third instar grubs feed throughout the winter, pupate in the spring, and then do the whole thing over again. What you're going to see in the next upcoming slides are vertebrates such as crows, skunks, raccoons are really a good indicator that you have this active in your area, because it doesn't take them long to cue in on these really scrumptious new land shrimp that have just colonized and start using it as a food resource. This is some of the damage that they cause. You'll see a lot of browning turf. You'll see a lot of rototilled turf, and then you'll see homeowners trying to renovate lawns and reseed. But they essentially just feed, the grubs feed on the fibrous roots. They like to stick to mainly cereal species of grasses, but will feed on other species of plants too if that's all they have to eat. they'll cause this dieback, especially when we get our first warm days. And in June and July, you'll see a lot of fried lawns. Another good indication is if you see a fried lawn, you can just walk up to that turf, give a pull on it, and it'll just pop right out of the ground because it has essentially no roots holding on and gaining purchase in the soil. This is also what you're most likely to see, and it was really impressive around the Seattle area, how much of this we saw of where crows would go into neighborhoods and start literally renovating lawns. And I love some of this footage. Is like how are they going to just flip that turf off? In Canada, they've seen other types of vertebrates also come visit and start rolling back your turf to feed, and this will be pretty striking if we get folks in Western Washington also seeing this phenomenon. It's almost a better wildlife attractor than a salt lick for your backyard. Distribution, it was detected in British Columbia in 2001, and it's important to note that it was first detected in British Columbia by a trained master gardener that knew that they should not have grubs in their turf. So good job, master gardeners in British Columbia. Subsequently, in Washington State, we ran light trap surveys in Blaine, Washington. Didn't find any passage of adult beetles coming over the border because it was basically there in the lower mainland of British Columbia. They did detect periodic adults in Japanese beetle surveys at the airports in 4 locations, including Spokane in 2008. And then finally, in 2016, an actual infestation was detected in SeaTac area, again, brought to our attention by WSU Master Gardener. So great job, Master Gardeners, for finding these new pests. And essentially, you know, we got a few spots here and there, but over the years, those infestations got larger and larger to where infestations are quite large now around the SeaTac area. And we're finding spots outside of that area. We found some spots up in Kirkland and this earlier this year in 2018. We've found other spots more down by Kent. And Chris just alerted to me that we found a spot in DuPont, Washington, which is, you know, quite a bit further south of SeaTac. So over the upcoming years, we can expect a spread of this beetle from that kind of SeaTac epicenter. Survey techniques. What you want to do is just almost like we trained people during the crane fly years, go in and collect in square foot samples to develop kind of an idea of what kind of load that turf is experiencing. And we generally suggest the thresholds at least are at about 5 to 10 grubs per square foot in lawns that are like mine, that are very lowly maintained. So you can expect significant damage to happen with that density. If you have a better maintained yard where you offer nutrition, good mowing height, regular mowing, and good nutrient program, you can tolerate more, up to 20 grubs per square foot for that type of turf. And what we're gonna do is great. This spring we culminated experts from British Columbia, Oregon State University, WSU, and WSDA to really come together and decide, you know, boy, what are we gonna tell people what to do? And the consensus was that if you want turf, focus in on that good, growing good, healthy turf. And what that means is have good mowing practices, have good irrigation practices, and have good nutrition schedules for maintaining your turf. We are concerned that we'll see an increase of pesticide use as this pest kind of starts developing this kind of drastic type of damage. Right now, cultural recommendations that encourage frequent watering during those flight periods and egg laying periods appear to be that that might be a good recommendation to use as a cultural practice in addition to growing healthy turf to avoid pesticide and insecticide use. So right now, those are the take-home messages for this pest. This is also a funny sign up by Vancouver, because again, you'll notice the animal damage well before you actually notice the damage caused by the grubs. I realize that encouraging people to water during flight and egg laying period is counter to what WSU has normally recommended for maintaining turf in a homeowner situation. But right now that it looks like that's a good cultural practice to encourage as you've identified a lawn that's infested. We're going to also, much like the lily leaf beetle, we're going to ask you to help us determine the actual distribution of this pest. Chris has developed a European Chafer report form that will circulate and distribute widely once that's open on live online. Again, I encourage you to go to pubs.wsu.edu and the Invasive Species Council website to look at current information about European Chafer. All right, I think I'm going to make it. It is 12:56. I got you till 1:30, and I'll make sure I allow plenty of time for questions. But I wanted to also cover this insect because this one's been in the news quite a bit, and this is the brown marmorated stink bug. Heliomorpha halis is the species name. Marmorated is a term used to kind of describe, the marbled, spotted, speckled nature of the light tan and dark brown condition of the spots on the back of the body. Some other identifying characteristics. Let me see if I can activate my laser pointer. This is called a scutellum, and I'll have better pictures of this later, but I want you to cue in on this. So the more that you see it, the better you'll be able to see it. This is called the scutellum. And with brown marmorated stink bug, we have a lot of native stink bugs that look similar, but often you'll see kind of two peach-colored spots at the corners of the scutellum, and that's one of the other identifying characters. This one is, again, native to Southeast Asia, and Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and China is where it likely came from before it entered North America. It was introduced in 1996 in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and honestly, I was a little bit cavalier about this pest because it did pop up in Portland in 2001. We weren't too concerned about it because we rarely have stink bugs that are tremendous crop and homeowner issues, and boy did I eat my words in the later 2010, getting close to 2009, 2010, as populations exploded on the East Coast, caused millions of dollars of crop loss and tree fruit. And then we started seeing those monstrous populations kind of develop in the Portland, Vancouver area too. So in addition to crop loss, as many of you have already experienced, it's a nuisance urban issue also. So this one, again, spread very quickly across the United States and has caused significant issues as it's colonized new environments. And we don't quite know what it's going to look like as far as damage here in the Pacific Northwest, but that's something that researchers are studying right now. The brown marmorated stink bug life cycle is very unique in the sense that you'll start seeing this very soon. The overwintering adults right now are feeding, developing resources to lay these kind of egg or these whiskey barrel, keg barrel shaped eggs. They usually lay them in clusters of 25 to 30. And those first instar nymphs are quite striking in the sense that once they pop out of the egg, they'll turn around and actually feed on some of the yolk remnants of the actual egg before dispersing. So when you flip over leaves, you'll see that little cluster of white eggs that are hatched, and then almost kind of these ladybuggish looking things surrounding that egg cluster and feeding. And you're not going to confuse this with much else out there as far as feeding on the underside of leaves right now. So eggs begin to hatch in May and June. Those go through 5 growth immature stages called instars, and those will feed on plant juices, anything that they can essentially penetrate with their mouth parts as far as a plant substrate they'll feed on. But they'll focus in more on to seeds and developing fruit. So they'll actually have to acquire a certain amount of nutrition before they can actually be reproductive adults. It's one thing to note, as these nymphs grow through their immature stages, they become quite active. When I first, we put out a public release in Southwest Washington when we saw populations blow up in Portland area, and to get the first detection in Washington State that was made by a person in downtown Vancouver, and so once he reported the pest, I met Eric Lagaza, our chief entomologist down there, and we went to go look at the site. And what struck me the most is as these nymphs developed in size and temperatures warmed, they're highly mobile, highly agitated, and literally the neighborhood was just crawling with these bugs up and down trees, on cars, everywhere, on people. They're very mobile, they're good walkers, and they get quite active as temperatures rise. They overwinter as adults, and emerge about now after the overwintering as adults. We think that they're likely only having 1 to 1.5 functional generations per year. Again, that's something that research at Oregon State University and Washington State are getting a number of phenology data years to really develop a clear picture of the life cycle of this insect. Here's what those overwintering aggregations look like, and if you haven't experienced this, you're lucky. In those areas like Southwest Washington and Vancouver, where they've been dealing with this insect for a number of years now, essentially in the fall, beginning in September and October, adults will form these mass aggregations on southern facing eaves of houses and other structures too, and they'll look for entrance into that wall void and usually aggregate in large numbers there too. And sometimes this can be in the thousands as far as winter aggregations in a house. You can imagine that causes a lot of disruption as those bugs get disoriented and during the winter and wake up on the inside of the house and fly around your house and get dropped down into your cereal. They are called stink bugs because they do stink. They smell like rotten cilantro. If you've ever had the chance to smell rotten cilantro, it is very similar. Here's another of what those overwintering situations can look like as stink bugs look for those aggregations and overwintering spots. They can really get down in the nooks and crannies of structures and cause a lot of problems. Here's why they're a crop pest. Within Asia, they had about a 300 known host plant range, and in the U.S. so far they've identified well over 60 hosts. And look at that host range. They pretty much like to eat all the plants that we like, both our ornamentals and crop plants. When they move into a new area, I've used these as indicator plants. Catalpa trees, English holly, and maple are all great trees to go look at and see if you have brown marmorated stink bug active in your area. And right now is an excellent time to do so. if it's something that you're interested in, and I'll show you the current distribution map of where it is in Washington State. But I'd encourage you to visit your trees early in the morning before things really warm up. Either whack some branches and see what falls out of the canopy, or shake a branch and see what falls out, and see if you see adult bugs in that situation. But I'd cue in on these species of trees. In the Columbia River Gorge, where we first found it in Washington State, this was another set of hosts that it also liked to feed on, was Tree of Heaven, which is also native to Southeast Asia and is a very bad pestiferous weed that colonizes some of our riparian areas. And then also the Royal Empress tree. This is one that's starting to show up in naturalized areas in the gorge too, along with other places in Western Washington, but it has those gaudy purple weird flowers and humongous leaves that you won't confuse that with any of our native plants. But these are other potential hosts that I encourage you to go visit. You know, again, since its introduction, it's caused severe crop loss in the Mid-Atlantic states. We're starting to see crop loss here in the Pacific Northwest. I had the pleasure of working with Joe Bodine out at Joe's farm there in Greater Vancouver area. And if you've never been to Joe's farm, I highly encourage you to pay a visit. It's a great diversified farm. But he started seeing stink bugs show up on crops like his some of his bell peppers and tree fruit crops, and so it was one that as far as I know, he was one of the first Washington growers to have to deal with this pest. Other issues that they're showing up on as far as causing secondary damage, there's a concern with it causing taint in wine grapes as grape clusters are harvested. If stink bugs get into that harvest, there's a chance that they get agitated and produce a lot of stink during that agitation and taint the flavor of wine. OSU and WSU are still working on those issues. They've also found it feeding on hops, and there's a report of them feeding on marijuana crops in Oregon State. So you can imagine this is going to be high on consumer concerns as far as how this bug impacts those types of products. All right, but if you run across this insect, we want to know about it and encourage you to report sightings to this email address. And I'll let the slide stay here for a few minutes so you can jot that down. And really what we'd want to know is where you found this bug and send us a picture so we can confirm it. And we're going to go through some of the lookalikes here shortly. But again, we'd like you to report sightings so we can kind of track this insect as it kind of spreads across the state. Right now, here's our current known distribution that Dr. Betsy Beers has been collecting for the past 5 years, along with Michael Bush, and this has kind of culminated since that initial detection in Washington State. We've been trying to track it, and really the most effective way to track this spread is really through folks like yourself in an uninfested area reporting it, and that's sure helped us get a better picture of its state distribution. Here's some of the natives that you might confuse it with. We have individual BMSB cards that you can request and we can send you if your office doesn't have any. They'll help people kind of walk through the different characteristics that are used to distinguish brown marmorated stink bug from some of the other stink bugs out there. But the key thing to hone in on are the white bands on the antenna and the legs, along with a smooth shoulder. So let me get my pointer here. And what you can see here is this edge. My pointer's kind of behaving weird. How do I get this? This edge right here, when you look at here's the head right here. If you look along that shoulder edge, it'll be smooth in nature. Some of our native ones will have combination of bands, no bands, and if they have bands, they'll have this toothed edge, like here on these two genera. And if they don't, if they have no bands on, they might also have a smooth shoulder. So that combination will help you identify, along with looking for those two kind of peach spots on the scutellum. We have a fact sheet that you can download at pubs.wsu.edu. We haven't updated it with its current distribution, but all the other information is accurate there. And this is just to help you kind of walk through some of those characteristics and what you might confuse it with as far as other home hibernators or other insect pests or stink bugs that we have that look like it. So what are we going to recommend? Highly encourage you to visit HortSense and the PNW handbook. At a national level, there's a repository that all states that are working on this insect are contributing to, called stopbmsb.org. This will have a lot of good management tips. Has a great DIY home soapy trap that you can construct very cheaply to help trap insects that may be flying around your house on the inside. But I encourage you to visit these two resources regularly to stay up on current recommendations. But I'll end it on this note. This is likely our saving grace is biological control. Our WSU graduate student Joshua Milnes found a wasp that feeds on the eggs, and this is an interesting story because this wasp is not native to North America. It was found on the East Coast in association with other ports of entry that BMSB may have used, and this wasp naturalized in those parts on the East Coast, so the East Coast may start to enjoy some level of biological control by this wasp that feeds on the eggs. There was an effort to understand this, so in hopes that maybe we could release this wasp here in the Pacific Northwest. Releasing new biological control agents is very intensive. It has to go through a lot of screening to understand those ecological impacts. But with Josh's finding, this is kind of sped up that process to understand kind of what the status is of this predatory parasitic wasp here in the Pacific Northwest. So good job, Josh, if you're on and listening. Good job finding that. So with that, I'd just like to thank you for taking the time to participate on this first detector training. And I'm going to turn it back over to Justin to see if there's any questions that have popped up that we can go through and answer.
Okay, so if you have a question, please raise your hand and or enter it into the chat box. Currently, we have one question, Todd. This is from Lisa Scott, and Lisa wants to know how you are collaborating with people in British Columbia
I see one question
to address the spread of BMSB. And Lisa is based in the Okanagan Valley, where the outbreak was deemed far more extensive than was
expected. In the Okanagan Valley, where the outbreak was deemed far more extensive in 2017 than we expected. Both sides of the regulatory agencies have communicated about this insect. This one isn't necessarily a federally regulated insect in the case that, well, it's already well within North America, and there's not much federal regulatory ways to manage it. But I can tell you this, that also the researchers like Dr. Beer's lab have been working with Okanagan industries up there in the Okanagan Valley to kind of coordinate research and research needs. But yes, that's consistent what I've heard, that British Columbia has a much more extensive population than what they previously thought. Any other questions?
We have Jackie Rasmussen that has her hand up. Jackie, I'm going to unmute you.
I'm sorry to. No, I didn't.
Okay, I see that people are.
There, we can hear you, Jackie.
Raised. So I'll start at the top. Jackie Rasmussen, your hand is raised, and I think you're unmuted right now.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Now I can hear you. Sorry, I had mine turned down.
It's a good test. I actually noticed my hand was raised at the beginning of the webinar and put it down. So sorry, I didn't have a question, but it's been fantastic. Thank you very much.
Alrighty, thanks. Sorry, Justin, if you were talking all that time, my volume down.
It's not a problem.
All right, next question with hand raised is the first one, Nabil Kaduri. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that right, but if you have a question, go ahead. Oh, you're not muted. There you are. You're unmuted.
I'm in Thurston County here. Are you still interested in getting a VMSP submission already been identified here?
Great. Did you email it to the list?
I will do that.
Awesome. What we really could use is make sure that accompanies an image. There's others out there that have submitted and haven't gotten a response. It's likely because we got a little bit of a backlog, and we prioritize responses based on those submissions that had an image. So if you send us a picture, you'll get a response much faster.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, our next one is Jennifer DeShong.
Hello?
Hi, I can hear you.
Okay, my question is the lily leaf beetle. Is there any other native beetles or other beetles that might be confused with?
Superficially, there's another beetle that is brightly colored like that lives underneath the bark of trees. It's called a cucujid beetle. I'm pulling it off the top of my head, so it's but yeah, I believe it's in the family Cucujidae. Those are really flat though. They're almost like, you know, they live underneath bark, so they're very compressed. And so if you see some big, you know, scarlet colored beetle flying around, that might be one that you confuse it with. But if you see that red beetle on lilies, there's nothing out there that looks like it.
Okay, so if it was a bigger one flying around, like say in my yard, I live in Skamania County, by the way. Hi, you guys. Miss you.
Hi. Miss you too.
Anyway, so there was a nice, bright colored red beetle flying around the yard the other day, and I didn't bother to catch it or anything, but I was just curious if it could be.
Well, knowing that you live in the woods, it was probably one of those cucujids.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, thanks. Good to hear from you.
Yeah.
All right, next question from Christopher Dobbins. Oh, I don't get let's see, how do I do that?
Hey, Todd, so Christopher is having some bandwidth issues, and I'll read his question. The question was, Christopher's had problems connecting through home bandwidth to the webinar, and was wondering if this will be recorded, and the answer is yes. This has been recorded, and we will make it available online in the near future, and we will email everyone a link when that is available.
All right, was that the
Todd, we have a question from Karen Adams, and Karen is wondering if you can discuss any concerns about the use of biocontrols.
Well, you know, overall, that's a great question, and historically there have been mistakes made with releasing biological control organisms, and due to those kind of, there's also a learning curve that humans kind of caught up on. But due to that, there's very strict regulations on how and when agencies can release biological controls. So any potential organisms that are considered for biological control release are scrutinized through numbers of studies to make sure that they work within a very limited host range, so they aren't going to impact native plants and so forth. But also in that scrutiny, it's weighed against how much damage is the control organism causing. So there's a navigation made on making those assessments on, well, if they don't release a biological control organism, the exotic pest is going to do far more damage than what the potential off-target damage is biological control organism might do. But again, whether you're talking weeds or other insects, there's a large amount of scrutiny and host testing before that can even be considered, and it's quite a long process. My colleague Jen Andreas works heavily in this area, and I think she's discussed some instances where is up on the order of 13 years of really good work to screen some of those biocontrol organisms. But they're actually doing a study, both WSDA and WSU, led by Jen Andreas and Chris Looney. They're going out to folks like yourself to actually measure your attitudes and knowledge about biological control, to really update to see where the public is at on their opinions of it. So great question.
Great. Todd, we have a question from Tracy Benson-Curdy, and Tracy is wondering if it's feasible for BMSB to attach to awning material on a trailer and then travel through a desert and survive for over a year, I guess. So how is BMSB spread, and how long could it survive in transit?
Hey, that's a great question. Yeah, BMSB is really good at getting into nooks and crannies during the dormant season. So they'll start seeking those overwintering sites in September and October, and we've seen them kind of squeeze in between the vinyl and weather stripping of doors and windows and those seals, and hitchhike on RVs. So yeah, they'll get into any nook and cranny that they can get into during that time. And as far as surviving for a year, no, they're probably not going to survive that long. And essentially what they want to do is, once temperatures warm up, especially if you're heading south, those will warm up a lot earlier. The bugs will warm up and agitate and fly away to start doing what they want to do. So if something's been contained for a year, there won't be any real viability to those bugs that might have hitchhiked on that.
Great. So Todd, we have a question from Lisa Scott. When will the first Detector handbook become available online? It says states coming soon. Do you want to take that, or would you prefer me to take it?
Yeah, go ahead and take it.
All right. Well, Lisa, the the first Detector handbook is in draft form right now. We will hopefully be releasing this information prior to July 31st of this year.
And we'll also try and keep that updated as new pests and new priority pests are identified by the council. The purpose of that handbook is to be kind of a living handbook that kind of updates and adapts as things change.
Okay, Todd, we have a question from Marguerite. Has the European Chafer beetle been known for causing trouble with hay and grass and pasture crops?
That's a great question. European Chafer, again, prefers grass species. And so, yes, in the Midwest, it was a pasture pest, but only on grass species. and even cause some damage in wheat grown in the Midwest. So yes, I expect that European chafer is going to be much like the European crane fly. If you were here in the 80s and saw the colonization and infestation that the European crane fly did, I imagine we'll see the same type of damage with European chafer, where it affects lawns, pastures, and other cereal crops.
We have no additional questions, Todd.
Well, great. That's fun. Sorry that I pulled the old man thing and turned down my volume, and well, you were probably asking questions.
Great job, Todd, and thanks everyone.
Hey, thank you. And feel free to contact me if things pop up and you have other questions.